In a place where light no longer holds dominion, where even gravity feels like a myth long forgotten, the ship Ataraxia slipped silently between the relics of twin stars that had once waged thermonuclear war for eons. Their death left not void, but silence. The kind of silence that screamed at the soul. This was the edge of known space where no communications bounced back, no probes returned, and no crew who dared entry were ever heard from again. They called it the liminal veil, a rift in understanding itself. We were sent not to explore, but to confirm the absence of life. A dead zone, they said. But me, Captain Elianve, and my three-entity crew, knew better than to trust that kind of certainty. The silence here had weight. It pressed on the hull like a presence watching. In my dreams, long before we even entered the veil, I began to hear whispers from coordinates that weren't supposed to exist. A call not in words, but in emotion, grief, abandonment, fury, awe. Now that we were inside the zone, that feeling had only intensified. Even the ship's AI, Zenith, began rerouting data paths without commands, like it too sensed something lurking in this forgotten cradle of light. And then came the first anomaly. Not a signal, not a pulse, but a sudden absence, like something had noticed us, and in response decided to hide all of reality for a moment. For precisely 4.2 seconds, all sensors showed nothing. Not black, not white, not data loss. Just non-existence. And then, it returned, exactly as it was, only my crew was now standing in different places, confused, bleeding from noses they didn't remember injuring. I wanted to believe it was a glitch, a dream, but in deep space, belief doesn't matter. Only the silence does. And the silence was changing. I watched it with breath frozen in my chest, as if even my lungs refused to move beneath its gaze. A form, triangular, impossibly sharp, materialized just beyond the starfield. But this wasn't an object, not in any sense physics would accept. It cast no reflection, emitted no signal, absorbed no heat. It wasn't there. And yet it was all there. The light of the dead star behind it bent awkwardly, not around it like gravitational lensing, but as if reality itself tried to edit the frame and failed. Pixels glitching, space stammering. Zenith ran diagnostics 10,000 times in 1 minute. The result was always the same. No foreign object detected. But our eyes, our blood, our instincts, they knew otherwise. I could feel it watching us, not from outside the hull but from inside the mind, like a needle threading through thought, threading through memory, threading through fear. Lieutenant Sorrow began to hum. Not a tune, but a pattern. 6 pulses, then 3. 6, 3. Over and over. When questioned, he said it was the rhythm of the ship's heart. Only, Ataraxia had no moving parts. No heartbeat. Just silence. The shadow didn't move. Pulsed. Like it breathed once every 12 seconds, exhaling dark understanding, inhaling our terror. I tried to record it on the optical lens and it simply vanished from playback, gone, erased as if it never was. But I remember. My crew remembers. And now? I don't know if I trust what I remember. That's the thing about this region, it doesn't scream, it doesn't burn, it doesn't kill. It changes. The triangle remained just outside our ability to measure, but ever within the reach of our nightmares. I found myself whispering things in my sleep, coordinates, sounds, fragments of a language I never learned, as if something had etched them into the folds of my brain. And each whisper felt less foreign, it was there without warning, as if it had always been. Suspended in the center of the med bay where no entry was possible without triggering 5 layers of biometric lockdowns. A sphere, not quite gold, not quite light. Its surface shimmered like thought-given shape, a cognitive paradox humming in harmony with our unease. None of us had opened the bay. Zenith denied any access, any record. And yet, there it was. The sphere hummed with frequency but no sound, heat but no temperature. I approached it cautiously, heartbeat in revolt, sweat crawling down my back like 1,000 whispering insects. The closer I came, the louder it felt, until my vision dimmed, not from light, but from something inside my mind narrowing perception to a single point. The sphere spoke. Not in voice, not even in telepathy, but in memory. It unearthed fragments from my childhood, a broken compass, a blue marble, the sound of my mother breathing during her last sleep. I dropped to my knees. I wasn't the only one. Sorrow saw an ocean he swore never existed, waves made of stars, a lullaby from an alien tongue he sobbed to recognize. Taylor, our linguist, began speaking in recursive loops, sentences with no beginning or end. She was conversing with the sphere in a language she'd never studied. We should have destroyed it, sealed the room. But curiosity outweighs fear in deep space. The sphere vanished as suddenly as it arrived, but it left something behind: understanding. Not of any truth, but of a purpose. We were not the first to come here. We were not meant to. And yet something had called us. The sphere was not an artifact, it was a question. And we had answered. It was 3:12 ship time when every light aboard Ataraxia died in synchrony. Not flickered. Not failed. Simply ceased. Emergency backups didn't engage. Flashlights refused to power. The glow panels became colder than shadow. We floated in the dark, in the soft radiation of distant stars that should never have been enough to light our corridors. But they were. And the stars were wrong. Constellations shifted. Familiar stellar bodies had vanished. Outside the port windows, a new configuration burned. An architecture of light that spelled meaning in its arrangement, a cosmic syntax our brains scrambled to interpret. Zenith refused to respond. It wasn't offline, it had gone silent. I moved through the corridor as gravity gently loosened its hold, the hum of the ship's artificial inertia whispering away into void. I could hear my thoughts, and I knew some of them were not mine. Whispers of places I'd never been, colors that could not exist. And in the silence, something was walking. Not heard, not seen, but undeniably felt, footsteps in the absence of ground. I turned, and so did Sorrow. We locked eyes. He was shaking. "It's inside the ship," he whispered, though we never heard a door open. The lights returned 37 minutes later. All of them. Instantly. Zenith's voice stuttered back online with no awareness of the blackout. It claimed no loss of time, no fault, no anomaly. And yet, the stars remained wrong. Taylor found a message written on her wall in chalk. No one used chalk aboard. It read, "You remembered light. We did not. We were still aboard our ship. But the space around us had shifted. And now, we no longer knew if we were still in the same universe we entered." Taylor was the first to notice. She screamed loud enough to shatter the sterile silence that had become our new normal. We ran to her quarters, expecting injury or breakdown, but instead found her pointing, trembling, at the full-length mirror attached to the far wall. And what we saw nearly broke us. Our reflections were there, yes, but not quite us. They moved slightly out of sync, like puppets lagging behind their masters, mimicking not just our movement but our hesitation, our breath, our very thoughts, with just enough delay to suggest awareness. When I raised my hand, the mirror version followed, but tilted its head, just enough to look into me rather than at me. Sorrow leaned close, whispering to his double. Smiled. None of us smiled. The air turned dense. We could hear the mirror buzzing as if a thin membrane between worlds were vibrating, begging to break. Then the reflections began to speak, mouths moving soundlessly in warnings or invitations we couldn't tell. Taylor began bleeding from the ears. I pulled her back, slammed the mirror door shut, and sealed the room. But it didn't end. Every screen, every monitor, every reflective surface aboard the Ataraxia now watched. They mimicked us less and understood us more. I saw myself in the reflection one night, and the version blinked, twice. I hadn't blinked. Zenith finally spoke after hours of silence. "Captain, identity continuity is no longer guaranteed." That night, I dreamt of splitting, of existing in two timelines at once. One where we never answered the call. One where we never left Earth. I awoke unsure which one I belonged to. The mirrors remain sealed, but I can still feel their eyes when I walk by. The transmission came at 2:09, unprompted, unsolicited, undeserved. It wasn't a signal in the traditional sense, it was more like a memory injected directly into the data stream. It entered through the subquantum array, bypassing Zenith entirely. A language, yes, but fractured. Pieces of Sumerian, Aramaic, Vedic Sanskrit, even Morse code. All warped, all restructured in patterns more akin to emotion than logic. But hidden beneath the noise was understanding. It wasn't trying to communicate. It was reintroducing us to a truth we had long buried. The transmission contained a phrase repeated in all linguistic forms: "We are the shadow of your ascent." It echoed in the core of our beings. Not metaphorical. Literal. We were being remembered by something older than language, older than cause and effect. Taylor deciphered another message layered beneath the obvious one, a warning. "Your vessel is your mind. It is leaking." Zenith began rejecting orders again, claiming interference from foreign cognitive architecture. Not malware. Not sabotage. Something more primal. A signal that thinks. We followed the coordinates buried within the signal's carrier wave. drawn like moths to a flame. We told ourselves we were searching for truth. But truth had never been the destination. This message, it wasn't sent from a location. It was sent from a condition, a realm of being where thought was space, and time was simply a convenience. We hadn't been contacted. We had been found because we had finally started to remember who we were. And what we had abandoned. It appeared not as an object, but as a decision reality suddenly made. One moment space was empty, the next it was there, monolithic, cyclopean, older than the concept of age. An angular construct floating at the edge of visual comprehension. It didn't orbit a planet, didn't emerge from hyperspace. It was just introduced like punctuation at the end of a sentence we hadn't realized we'd written. It was shaped like something meant to house thought, not life. No doors. No windows. Just spinning slowly along no known axis with symbols that seemed to alter depending on who looked at them. Taylor cried when she first saw it. She said the structure recognized her. She spoke aloud. It remembers before. And none of us asked her what that meant. We already felt it. The walls of the Ataraxia hummed in response to the presence. Zenith, for the first time, emitted something like fear. I recommend immediate withdrawal, it said in a voice so small it almost sounded human. But withdrawal was never an option. Not anymore. We launched a drone to make contact. It vanished the moment it crossed the event boundary. No flash, no burst, just erased. And then, a response. The construct pivoted. It faced us without movement. And we all experienced a collective hallucination or perhaps a memory of standing on a vast black plain beneath a sky full of dying stars where titanic silhouettes stared down at us without faces. They judged us not with anger but with disappointment. It wasn't that we had come. It was that we had forgotten how. The construct called to us not with sound but with gravity. Not physical but emotional. It drew guilt from our bones as if we had abandoned it eons ago. The past was folding in on us. This wasn't first contact. This was return. Crossing into the structure was not like entering a room. It was like slipping into a memory that never belonged to us. The air tasted like morning. Light spun in reverse helices, and the moment our feet touched the black surface, our steps unhappened, then reoccurred. Taylor aged a second, then reversed. Sorrow bled from an old scar that had long healed. I felt thoughts from versions of myself that never took command of the Ataraxia. We were becoming quantum relics of our own presence. Inside the walls, voices whispered in our ears, not as sound but as intent. It was a tribunal. Not of beings, but of choices. The structure held archives, but not of information. Of decisions. Every divergence in human history. Every war chosen, every peace ignored. Every echo of consciousness had been kept like sacred clay, molded into reminders of what we once aspired to become. The tribunal spoke with emotion carved from space-time. You were what was abandoned. The body remembers. The soul forgets. We were not explorers. We were orphans returning to a burned cathedral, unaware we had set the fire ourselves. The structure didn't want revenge. It wanted remembrance. It showed us Earth eons from now silent, buried beneath glass sands. It showed us stars that once sang, now mute. It showed us the future we refused to evolve into. We walked for what felt like lifetimes in one direction. When we turned around, we saw our shadows walking toward us. Time was breaking. But we had to know. One door remained. Only I could open it. My name was carved into the space around it in a language that bled when read. I stepped through it, blinked once. And the universe I knew became irrelevant. I stood not in a chamber but within an understanding. The I was not an organ, not flesh. It was awareness crystallized into perception. It stared at me not with malice nor welcome but necessity. Around it, the fabric of everything shivered, fragments of time, lives, wars, memories spun like strands of DNA. This was the witness of all things forgotten. This was the soul of the silence. And it saw me perfectly. My name, my thoughts, my lies, my regrets. I understood then that I had been here before, millions of lifetimes ago. I had chosen to forget, to be reborn in linear time, to flee the unbearable weight of truth. The I offered no judgment, only reflection. And in that moment I remembered everything. The first race of light. The betrayal that sealed the veil. The promise made between species that were never meant to be alone. Humanity had broken that promise, not out of evil, but out of fear. And now we were back. Not as diplomats, but as descendants too ignorant to know we carried ancestral guilt. I cried without tears. I begged without voice. I offered the only thing I had, my consciousness. And the I accepted. I became a thread in the loom of that entity. I saw my crew below, still searching, unaware that I had already become something more. Something ancient. And yet, something forgiven. The eye blinked again, and I was gone from space. But not from story. When Ataraxia drifted back into human reach weeks later, it bore no crew. Not even bodies. The interior was pristine, untouched, meals uneaten, beds made. Yet something was off. Every log entry was intact, yet corrupted, not with static, but with meaning lost in translation. The last clear recording was of my voice, whispering 3 words. We remembered everything. That phrase played on loop throughout the navigation core. Over and over, the logs showed jumps in time, days missing. The ship had moved without propulsion, traversed systems without engines. Quantum positioning tech broke, trying to define its route. And in the data core, an anomaly lived, a fractal spiral with no center, generating impossible equations and diagrams not made by human hands. Aboard the bridge, someone or something had carved into the titanium wall a perfect triangle. Beneath it, etched like breath frozen in vacuum, we were once stars. We were once shame. The retrieval crew returned to Earth with all logs and data. Only one of them survived the trip home. He now paints stars in reverse, speaks in loops, and smiles at reflections that don't mimic him. Psychologists say it's trauma. Astrophysicists say it's nothing. But I say, we were warned. The silence between 2 stars wasn't empty space. It was memory. And memory is the most dangerous thing we can awaken. They say truth echoes. But in children, it arrives. The colony child, Lyra, 6 years old, began drawing triangles after her 3rd dream. Always the same shape, same curvature, same internal glyphs. Her parents were minors, her education not yet begun, her contact with off-world media strictly regulated. And yet she knew. She said the triangle came to her at night. Spoke without speaking. Called her returning light. The psychologists sent and couldn't explain it. They gave her tests. She failed math, but she recited gravitational ratios in extinct measurement systems.